Hi there, I'm Hamish, and today I'll be talking about the impacts of humans and climate on Lake Loktak in northeast India, which forms part of my PhD project. So, Lake Loktak is the largest lake in northeast India and one of the largest in all of southern Asia. It's been classed as a lake and wetland of international importance under the Ramsar Convention, and also one whose ecological character has changed, is changing, or is about to change as a result of human interference. It's broadly also classed as a shallow subtropical lake. It's hugely important, supporting just under 300,000 people on a daily basis through the provisioning of food, drinking water, and also livelihoods through fishing and tourism, for example. It's also hugely important to a range of flora and fauna, including the Sangha deer, of which only 260 remain globally, all of which reside at the lake and rely on it for their existence, essentially. And on top of this, tens of thousands of migratory birds visit the lake on an annual basis. So another very important and interesting thing to note about the lake is the existence of these floating islands known as fundi, which are essentially floating mats of soil, vegetation, and organic matter. They've been used in fishing practices historically and still are to this day, as you can see in these sort of circle-like shapes. And they can support villages in some cases and also are the main habitat of this Sangay deer that I mentioned earlier. So the lake faces many threats, one of which is pollution. There's not a single wastewater treatment plant in the whole of Manipur, and the catchment of the Lake Loktak area runs on a north to south basis through the main city of Imphal, with its no wastewater treatment plants, straight into the lake. So this brings in raw sewage effluent, industrial runoff into the lake alongside lots of agricultural runoff um, from the more rural areas. And there's also been some quite worrying reports of toxic pesticides being used to catch fish in the lake. Obviously terrible for anyone that consumes that fish or and indeed the lake itself and the biodiversity that lives in there. Another major threat is the construction of the Itai Dam, which occurred in 1983 to prop up to stabilize water levels for a hydroelectric power plant to be constructed. However, this has hugely altered the hydrological cycle in general, including the water levels, nutrient cycling of the lake, the fungi life cycle, as the fungi can no longer um, be flushed out of a lake on a seasonal basis as they once were, and has also hugely disrupted fish migration. On top of this, overfishing and climate have, um, of course, had their own impacts as well, but I probably won't go into those just so much today. So the first thing I did at the start of my research was organize a stakeholder meeting with my two supervisors, Virginia Panizzo and Rajiv Kangaban. This was held at the lake and included government officials, local fishermen, academics, and was a fantastic opportunity to firstly hear local people's concerns um, about what the major threats to the lake indeed were, and also was a fantastic opportunity to be able to show what the benefits of this sort of research could be on the lake going forward. So after that, we set out taking some samples. We took water samples from all these sites on the left and core samples from these on the right. Um, and where we undertook and then undertook these analyses um, from water chemistry to XRF diatoms and pesticide analysis, including many others, on the water samples and sediment samples to look at the effects of humans through time. So just to start with the water chemistry, what we see is that with the total phosphate is as you go, the x-axis here is increased distance from Imphal. As you can see on the map here, the main capital of the state. And what we observe is a huge decrease in TP as we increase our distance from the capital. And and these first two sites, 13 and 8, sadly we couldn't get a sample for 14. um, are well above the WHO limits for total phosphate. We see a similar story with SRP, with the only sites above baseline detection levels being 13 near the capital. Again, 14, which unfortunately we weren't able to take a sample for, and ammonium, again, a similar trend. So we can be fairly sure that this Imphal is a major source of nutrient pollution into the lake system. So in terms of the diatom data, well, diatoms and LOI, I've got plotted here. So start with LOI, um, and also to look at this, we're only going to look at this outflow core here because that's the one closest to the Itai Dam and likely the one that would be affected most by any changes as a result of the dam construction. So as we can see, the LOI increases quite considerably at the onset of the dam, um, suggesting a huge increase in organic matter. Meanwhile, we see a shift to more allogenous inputs through the increase of CN ratio and a decrease in our organic carbon-13 isotopes. And finally, what we also see is evidence for utilization of nitrogen through the nitrogen-15 isotope record. So what could be happening here, maybe? Um, on top of that, what we see is an increase in chlorophyll A and lutein. So just a sort of general increase in algae um, through time, but nothing too much else of interest on the pigments just there. So what could be causing these changes? And one of the major things is that, as I mentioned before, um, these fungi used to flush out of the lake system on a seasonal basis. Obviously, once you stick a dam there, right at the major outflow, this is no longer happening. So, as you can see, between 1989 and 2002, there's a huge increase in the expanse of lake area that's covered by these fungi. And this would explain the increase in LOI, chlorophyll, and lutein, the increase in CAN and decrease in organic carbon-13, suggesting a greater terrestrial input. Again, is likely due to these fungi because a lot of them will, of the plants on the fungi will have a terrestrial signal as opposed to macrophytes or algal signal. And also, it's likely that the decrease in nitrogen isotopes here is again due to fungi because there's been evidence that the fungi like to utilize nitrogen and kind of simulate it quite readily. So just to move on to some of the diatom data, this is quite hot off the press, and I haven't managed to do a great amount of stats on it or analysis just yet. But obviously, what we can see at the onset of the dam, we have quite a big change, particularly in the degrees of tabularia fenestrata, and increases in niches, navicular, amphora, eucockinase, and staurinase. And the major sort of overriding theme here is that the tabularia are most happy in oligo to mesotrophic conditions, whilst these other species below the increase are quite happy, are quite eutrophic, tolerant of eutrophic conditions. And also a few of them are quite are mostly found attached to vegetation, macrophytes. Again, would so the increase in fungi here would provide an increased habitat for them. So that's likely an explanation for this change here. And again, this pesticide data is again quite hot off the press, but what we see is the presence of quite nasty chemicals that are banned in the UK and the EU and also sometimes in India, all of which have been cited to have terrible effects on aquatic biodiversity as well as terrestrial organisms, so diura and dichlorovos, acephate and malathion, to name just a few. However, as my suite of reference materials used in the analysis was mainly the ones that we used in UK analyses, and I didn't have I wasn't able to use um, the reference to these more nasty ones because that would have been very expensive. However, my supervisor did look at this um, back in India, and what we see is the evidence for aldrin, dealdrin, DDT, endosulfan, so really nasty chemicals such that they've been banned in the UK since the 70s. So this is really quite worrying overall as a picture. So to summarize here, I've managed to, for the first time, to um, plot the paleo-environmental record or some of the paleo-environmental record of Lake Loktak and demonstrate changes through time of um, of the lake of the lake conditions as a result of human activity. And what can be seen quite clearly is the construction of the SI Dam and pollution in the record. And hopefully this will be able to inform management and policy going forward and to the benefit of the lake. Thank you very much.